Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Heir's Lair. I am your host, Jonathan Taylor. The more astute among you might have noticed that I am not alone on screen. That is because I am once again doing an interview. And as part of this interview, I have an esteemed guest with me. Esteemed guest, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Leslie Ann Moore, uh, author of multiple novels, and hope I can talk about it here with Jonathan. And I'm very excited to be here.
Okay. Your newest novel, Skein of Fates, is out now. If I'm not mistaken, according to your Twitter. Uh, can you give us a brief synopsis of what that's like?
Well, Skein of Fates is it's essentially the retelling of the Snow White fairy tale, except with lots of political intrigue and a lot of social justice issues. So it deals with a young woman who she is living under the dictatorship of her stepmother, who overthrew her father in a coup. And she's very much at the beginning of the story very apolitical, but she eventually, through various things that happened to her, she eventually realizes that she can't just stand aside, even though she's part of the elite of society. She has a responsibility to help, essentially to help the people of her society regain their lost democracy. And so she throughout the novel is a first book in a series, and throughout the series it follows her journey. But it takes place on a planet, a distant planet, which was colonized by climate change refugees from old Earth, but an alternate Earth where the language of North America is Spanglish, so a mixture of Spanish and English.
Okay.
And so this is the language that the people of New Tierra, which is the name of the planet, this is what they speak. So, and that all comes from the fact that I live in Southern California, which is probably one of the largest Spanish-speaking cities on the planet. Spanish and Spanglish are widely spoken here. I myself speak not very good Spanish, but I do speak some Spanish. And so I felt like, fantasy needed I call it more like science fantasy, but I felt that it needed to reflect just the place that I come from, which is essentially a Spanglish culture.
Okay. I actually have two questions related to that are not related to my typical set of questions. Namely, you mentioned that the protagonist is a young woman. In the original Grimm fairy tale, Snow White is 7, and in
Mm,
the in the Disney movie she's 14. So
yes.
is she within is your protagonist within that range or beyond that?
No, she's actually 21. So more like in the movie Snow White and the Huntsman, which I don't know if you saw that movie, but she was more of a young adult. So yeah, she's 21.
Okay.
But she has a younger sister, but not quite like the. It departs actually quite radically from the original fairy tale, but there are some similarities.
Okay.
And I can tell you more about those if you have any more specific questions.
Okay. Nice to know you've done your research. Aside from that, do you know what the difference is between a pigeon and a Creole?
A pigeon and a Creole. I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that pigeon is more of it's closer to the original language, perhaps, whereas Creole is more of a departure. But I don't really know the exact distinctions between those two. So I'm assuming you're asking in relation to Spanglish.
You are indeed correct, and these are indeed linguistic terms. A pigeon is, say, when you have two communities of which speak different languages and now have to interact with each other, form a new and larger community, and they do so not necessarily by learning their individual languages, but by mixing and matching their
Mhm.
their languages in order to have a common tongue, so to speak.
Yes.
And a Creole is that combined language after it's gone through some generations of formalization.
Aha. So I think based on that definition, I would have to say my version of Spanglish that I have imagined that the people speak on New Tierra is more of a Creole than it would be a Pigeon.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that well, at least the way my world is structured, and I haven't written the history as far back as going back to Old Earth, but um, I have imagined that the people of North America have developed this over many, many, many generations on this alternate Earth that I have imagined.
Okay.
If that, I hope that answers the question.
I I would have other questions connected to connected to the history of the past few generations, but that would go but that would go somewhat beyond my beyond my typical parameters, where I try to keep it
Mm-hmm.
somewhat spoiler free. And it also
Sure.
sounds like you haven't exactly figured out all the details, so I'm skipping over that and instead going into the rest of my typical interview questions. Namely, you've already mentioned some uh, interesting aspects that went into constructing your world, and therefore I have to ask: is there anything that you would rather not talk about over the course of this interview?
Uh, no, I'm pretty much open to talking about anything if I've thought about it. If you ask me a question and I haven't quite figured out that detail yet, I'll let you know. But other than not giving away too much of the plot, of course, actually I want people to buy the book and read it. But just I'm open to discussing pretty much anything about it.
Okay. Next question. You mentioned that Skein of Fates is your fourth book, and you
Yes.
mentioned that it is the first in the series. Are the first three standalones, or are they a trilogy?
They are all connected. The first book ends. I try to at least end at a resting point of the story. So there is somewhat of a cliffhanger, but it's not like, oh, we've left our heroine in a burning building, and how is she going to get out? But it does come at a resting point in this story, and then the second book picks up pretty much right after the first book leaves off, and same with the third book. There are going to be four books altogether, so it's actually a tetralogy. The first two books are written, and then the third book is in process, and the fourth book is still in outline form. But I know how the entire story has been outlined. So, but it will be four books.
Okay. Uh, Next question. Is your novel debut also your writing debut, or did you write short stories or novellas or poetry before going to long
Before
form
going to
fiction?
novels. On my very first novel, called the title is Griffin's Daughter, and it's a pretty typical um, high fantasy, epic fantasy story. That was the very first novel I ever published. But I did begin writing. Um, well, the very first thing I ever wrote, it was ever published, was a poem, and I was only 12 at the time, which is a long time ago. But it was published. My mother read it and sent it into this magazine, unbeknownst to me, because I was only 12. And she sent it into a magazine, and lo and behold, they published it. So I guess you can say I've been a published author since age 12, but I didn't actually really write anything seriously. I was always a storyteller. I would just make up stories and just tell them to people, but I never actually wrote anything down till I got to college. And I actually started taking some writing courses, and I did write some short stories. But I always find that the short story form is just, I can't keep anything short. All my short stories just kind of mushroom into books. And so yeah, Griffin's Daughter was the first novel I actually published. And that was in, I want to say 2008, I believe. It was when that book first came out.
Okay. Next question. You said that you've pretty much been writing or telling stories your whole life. What inspires you to in general to create stories?
Well, I think my biggest inspiration is just all of the characters and ideas I have in my head. It's kind of, well, I think all authors will understand this, is that we all take inspiration from life, just what happens to us, and things that happen to our own personal lives, or just things that we see happening in the world around us. But also nature is very inspirational, and I think I just have so many like interesting characters in my head that just want to tell their stories, and just ideas about how to construct societies in ways that feel authentic to me, in ways that societies that I would want to live in, or societies that have very serious problems that I wish to tell how I would solve these problems. So yeah, I think that's it. And just my desire for social justice and just positive changes in the world, I think also drive me and inspire a lot of the plot points in my stories.
Okay. Now I'm gonna ask you a more specific version of this question. How did you think of writing the Griffin's Daughter? So what in particular inspired that one?
The very first book?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a roundabout way, but it started out as a short story in which I was interested in how a society that was grappling with giving up its magic in order to embrace technology. And so there was the original character was a young guy who was a wizard, but he was starting to see that maybe technology was going to replace magic. So, but that changed dramatically, morphed dramatically into becoming a story about, once again, about a young woman who she is a biracial person, as I am. But rather than she was half human and half elf. And she lived in a society, or she lives in a society. She lives in a human society where there is pretty nasty bigotry and racism against people who are, against elves for one, and against people who might be mixed race like she is. So even though she's the niece of the duke, of the local duke who she lives with, she's been treated as a servant like her whole life, and very, very discriminated against. So she decides that she's going to go find her elven kin, and she has one clue, and that's a ring with a white griffin on it. It's a griffin made out of white gold on a black background. And so, to make a long story short, she eventually does find her way to the elven people, but she's in for a little bit of a shock. And when she gets there, she is also discriminated against because there's now anti-human bigotry that she has to deal with. So
Yeah.
put that against a background of, and I wrote this book during the Iraq War, and I was very upset about that. And so there's a backdrop of a smaller country facing looming invasion by a very large empire. So the Elven country is they are the ones that are going to be invaded very shortly by this large human empire. And so it goes into the psychology of that and how they're dealing with that situation. So a lot of heavy issues in that book, that whole series.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, interesting thing to note, because I could think of a few other stories that work the same way. Among them, Star Wars, which is basically the Vietnam War with the Vietnamese as the good guys.
Indeed, yes. Star Wars classic.
Dune is also kind of like that, but with the Middle East as the good guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to behold, and it's also weird, frustrating, and somewhat funny that the same people who push for these kinds of wars then turn around and say that these works of art are actually apolitical.
Yes. I know. Huh?
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've already kind of covered the next question, but still might be interesting to behold. What is the thought process you're going through when you create your world or flesh out your characters?
Well, the main thing is I just want the characters to be believable. I want people to be able to connect with them and to identify with them and their human emotions. And even in Griffin's Daughter, where half the cast of characters were elves, they were not like Tolkien's elves, who were very cold and distant. My elves are very human, in a sense. So I want to make my characters, number one, I want to make them believable to audiences. I don't necessarily need to make them likable, but I want people to care about what happens to them, whether it's the good guys or the bad guys. As for the world, both the world of the Griffin's Daughter world and also the world of New Tierra, even though they're fantasy, or the Griffin's Daughter is quite based in the typical fantasy tropes. New Tierra is I call more science fantasy, because it's more science fiction than fantasy. But I still want to base my worlds on real world science or real world physics in a lot of ways. So even though in Griffin's Daughter there's magic, it's not like a lot of magic-based systems that we encounter in fantasy. It's more of a mind or a mental manipulation of energy. And they're also, as I said, they're also dealing with the realities that in the elven species, they're the ones with the magic, but they find that their magic is waning, and so they're going to have to start embracing technology. And I bring in a little bit of that, and it's all based on real world type technology that I can imagine. That's still a medieval style. It's at the medieval level, but they are thinking about technological advances. In New Tierra, it's pretty much all sort of science-based technology, even though the people are at the level of late 19th, early 20th century technology. They're still aware of their own lost advanced tech that they had. And so they're working towards trying to get back there. So people will recognize, they'll recognize computers and cars, and there's computers, there's cars, there's radio, but there are also airships. And there's also the cars are steam powered, or they're powered by kerosene, that sort of thing. So it's all, I want people to recognize real world ideas and real world technology while still reading a science fantasy or a fantasy story.
Okay, sounds interesting. I also have somewhat of a fusion of different scientific ideas that going around through my book. And I was wondering, what would be the best not necessarily fusion, but what would make sense for these people to develop, especially once they already have magic.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, when it comes to your books in general, do you have anything that would be comparable to, say, a deleted scene? So is there anything you wanted to include in any book you wrote, and decided against it? And if there is such a thing, what is it?
Anything that I wanted to include in my books. I have to think about that one. Maybe if you can answer or ask me another question, I'll think about that one. I've written and discarded so much. I'll have to try to think of a good one.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, the next question I have prepared is actually the flip side of that. Is there anything you initially opposed to including, but then realized, no wait, the book or the story I'm writing would be better off if I included this?
Anything? I think something that I had initially opposed putting in there. I think, all right. One of the things that, I thought of something. In Skein of Fates, I have the main male protagonist. He's a young guy. He wants to be part of the resistance, the revolution against the dictator.
Okay.
And he's very idealistic, in the beginning, and he believes completely in this rebel leader that he follows. So in the very beginning of the story, he gets arrested, and in the detention center, there's a lot of really bad stuff that goes, a lot of torture. And so I was really resistant at first to actually having him tortured or showing a scene where he was being tortured, because I felt like, oh God, I can't do that to him. I love him so much. I just can't do this to him. But then the very talented gentleman that helped me with the editor, excuse me, just one second. I'm really sorry about that. Anyway, the very talented gentleman that helped me edit it, he kind of pushed me into saying, well, maybe, I know it's painful, but maybe you should show this scene. So when I first wrote it, it was kind of sanitized, and then I got pushed to make it more graphic. And so then I wrote it really graphically, and it was just too horrifying. So I kind of it's sort of in the middle, but yes, so I did include this torture scene in the book. So that was for Skein of Fates. And in Griffin's Daughter, there is and this is another thing that was really hard for me, is to write a sexual assault scene. And I was flat out against it. I did not want to do it at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And it kind of made me sick to my stomach to even think about it. But I realized that in order for this to inform, it was essential to the story, that it happened. So I did write it. It was very painful. I don't like to read it, but I did water it down more than originally I had written it, which was it was too shocking for me to do it. So I did water it down, but it did ultimately get included in the story. Some people may disagree and say that it wasn't necessary. I think it was, but I've never had anybody complain about it, saying that it was gratuitous or that it was not necessary. So I think in the end it made it a better story.
Okay, that's actually a good sign that you've included it and people go, okay, yeah, that should be there.
Yeah.
Next question. Is there any aspect of writing that you either dread or rejoice when considering it? So, what is your favorite? What is your favorite part about writing, and what is your least favorite part?
My favorite part. I think my favorite part of writing, I really love writing dialogue. That's just like the easiest thing for me. The dialogue always comes first. I can hear the character speaking in my head very clearly, and so oftentimes that part will just flow, and I just find it I just love writing dialogue. I also love writing descriptions, just making them as beautiful as possible. I think the biggest thing I dread, is funniest thing, is I am just terrible at coming up with titles, like titles for the books, titles for the chapters. I'm a real big proponent of, I don't like just numbering chapters, which would be much easier for me because it's so hard for me to think of good title chapters, and I do just dread that part of it. Just trying to come up with them, but I make myself do it. So, and let's see what else. I think I think that's pretty much the thing that I really dread the most, is trying to come up with titles for things.
Okay. You've inspired me to go off on a little tangent again. Namely, you said you like writing dialogue, and you like writing description. Now I can help but think of is screenwriting is basically exactly that, dialogue and description, and something like 90 to 95%. And you also mentioned that you live in Southern California. Not going to say
Yes.
exactly where, but you live there. So, have you ever given screenwriting a shot?
Yes, actually. And my husband he's written several screenplays. He has one that's actually in active development at the moment. And we wrote a screenplay together with another writing partner of ours. And as I said, my husband has written several screenplays. So I find it, it's a really interesting exercise in really, really cutting down your words to the absolute distillation of, what scenes are about, what characters are about, because you just, as you said, it's dialogue and very brief descriptions. Because once a screenplay leaves the writer's hands and it gets into the hands of the producer and the director, a lot of the description is going to be left up to either the interpretation of the actors in terms of how characters behave, or how they speak, how they deliver their lines, or the director. So a lot of times we have to, as screenwriters, a lot has to be just left out because we know that the director and the actors are going to do a lot of the interpretation of it. So, but I don't consider myself a screenwriter at all. I'm a novelist, and that's my first love because I just love really lengthy, lush, detailed descriptions, and you just can't do that with screenplays.
Yeah, I get it. I'm still gonna. I still have. I think at least one more question about screenwriting, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Do you read the screenplays habitually or from time to time?
No, I don't actually, other than the ones that my husband writes and that we write together. But no, I don't actually read screenplays, although he does.
Okay. Of the screenplays that you did read, and of the ones that both you have read and have been translated, is there any, or are there any that you think have been mistranslated?
Uh, you mean as in not telling the story the way the screenwriter
Yeah.
intended? Um, I unfortunately I haven't read enough screenplays to be able to really answer that question. Um, what I can say is that um, screenwriting has really changed quite dramatically, like radically, since the early days of I want to say like movies from the 1940s to maybe even through like the 1970s. When you read those screenplays, they are typically much denser. There's like a lot more description and directions in those old screenplays that stuff would never fly in modern day Hollywood. So, um, yeah.
Okay. Uh, well, that aside now finished. Back to the back to my typical questions. Um, are you traditionally published or independently published?
I originally was traditionally published. All three of the Griffin's daughter books were traditionally published for quite a while. But then the publisher, the last publisher, did go out of business, and so I was able to get my rights back, and so they've been independently published since then. Um, Skein of Fates was has not been traditionally published. That's been indie published from the begining.
Okay. Is there a reason you chose indie publishing over traditional publishing for Skein of Fates?
A lot of reasons. Um, I first of all, I was going to publish it traditionally. It did have an agent. It was going to be shopped around, but I found that number one, I was just taking too long. And I'm not a young person anymore, and I don't have years and years and years to wait around. And number two, I found um, that people were trying to change my story and trying to make me, I guess, like truncate the story or shrink the story to fit a preconceived, I think, arbitrary idea of how long a book should be. And so I just kind of got fed up with it. And so I just decided I'm just going to do this myself. And I found that, I've did a lot of homework, a lot of research on self-publishing. And it is a lot of work. It's not easy by any means, a very steep learning curve, but I found that I have complete control over everything. And for me, ultimately, that's that's best for me. And even if it was traditionally published, Um, Unless you are, somebody like James Patterson, or you're, J.K. Rowling, or some other, and I know J.K. Rowling is kind of controversial these days, but any other like very huge author, the major traditional publishers aren't going to really give you any kind of um, support in terms of marketing. Like most authors have to do all their own marketing anyway.
Okay.
And so I figure, well, if I'm gonna have to do all this on my own, I might as well keep all the profit. Now, of course, I have to split the profit through, through the big company. We all know who that big company is that sells the books.
Yeah.
They take their cut right off the top. It's just the way it is, until things change. That's the way it is. But then I get to keep all the rest. I don't have to pay an agent. I don't have to give part of my money to a traditional publisher. So yes, even though it is a ton of work and very frustrating at times, it's still ultimately rewarding, and I have no plans on trying to do it any other way.
Okay. That actually also answers the next question I had, namely if you have any, namely if any of your pre-existing ideas have been proven true or false. You already given a rundown of how it was,
Okay.
more or less. Next up, how was the how was the initial how did the initial receptions of your books go so far? Were they as you expected them, or did you have any or did you experience anything that was a teachable moment, so to speak?
Uh, so in terms of like just how the reading public accepted them.
Reading public, or anyone like critique partners or beta readers or ARC
Yeah.
readers,
Hmm.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I've been really lucky uh, in that sense, is that when when Griffin's Daughter first came out, uh, it won a pretty prestigious publishing award right away. So it won the international, or, I'm sorry, the Independent Book Publishers Association, the IBPA. They represent many, both small presses, independent presses, and also a couple of larger indie publishing houses, which, of course, the publishing industry has consolidated so much since 2008 or 2009, but back then there were more. So it did win the IBPA award for best first fiction for 2008.
Okay.
And so that kind of gave kind of propelled it to getting a lot of good attention. So it's been very widely reviewed, and overall very positively reviewed, the whole series. With Skein of Fates, it has won one award so far. Book Fest, which is it's an online literary contest, so it won a couple awards there. As a teachable moment, though, I think with Skein of Fates, one of the biggest teachable moments came from a beta reader. One of the groups, there are essentially two groups of people, two ethnic groups of people that live on New Tierra. There are the tall people and there are the small people. So the small people, of course, correspond to, in the Snow White tale, they correspond to the dwarves. That word can be sometimes
Contentious.
misconstrued, but yeah, but they are, it can be contentious, yeah. And this smaller group of people, they are they originally were in amalgam of indigenous groups from old Earth, so indigenous peoples of North and Central America. Now this is an alternate Earth, so it's not like our Earth. and they were brought to New Tierra by the taller people, originally as slaves, but they did free themselves.
Yeah.
So when I wrote and they're known as the Tiqui, when I wrote their culture, I didn't want to base it on any particular indigenous culture because I was very concerned about not getting that right and perhaps causing offense. And I didn't want to do that. It was very important not to do that. So I thought I had done a decent job
Until
with my research and trying to, be as neutral as possible until I had a woman read it, and it turned out that she was an indigenous person. I didn't know this at the time because her name didn't identify her as indigenous, but she was. And she sent me a Twitter message saying that she couldn't continue reading it because of some of the things about the Tiqui that she found hurtful. And of course, I was very shocked, and I immediately asked her to please explain. And it turned out actually that was actually a good thing, because she then, after I asked her to, she then agreed to be my cultural sensitivity reader, if you're familiar with that term.
Yes.
And so she did end up reading the book, and she helped me immensely on correcting some things that, me as a non-indigenous person was totally ignorant of or didn't consider these things. And she really helped me out quite a bit. And I owe a great debt of gratitude to her for doing that for me, for helping me out with that. And in the end, she endorsed the book and got behind it. And so I hope that any other people that read it that might be of indigenous descent, North American or Central American, will find that the things that she helped me with are ring true to them. As I said before in another question, I want to make my characters believable, and I want people to be able to identify with them. So that was the biggest teachable moment.
Yeah. Next question. We are almost finished, but just a few more. This interview has been going on for a while. I didn't expect this, but now that I'm complaining, I actually welcome it, and I hope you do too.
I do too. Yes.
Okay. This one is admittedly more for younger writers, but still, I'm gonna ask you this. How many of the people you would call close, so that is friends, that is family, that is whoever else, knows that you are a writer, and how do they get along with that? How do they support you? Do they comment upon it? Do they joke about it?
I've been so fortunate, and that everyone that I know, all my friends, all of my family, everybody's has been very supportive from the beginning. A lot of my friends are writers. I spent many years as the vice president of the Greater Los Angeles Writers Society. And so I know a lot of writers, and I've never had anyone, no friends, no family, ever try to discourage me from doing this, which I know is not the case for some people, where they're ridiculed for wanting to be a writer or they're dismissed. But that's not been my experience at all. So, and plus I married a writer, so yeah. So we are each other's support system.
Okay. I think you might just be the most high-profile guest I've ever had here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, next question. We've already talked about teachable moment when it comes to the content of the writing. But have you had any other similar such moments, or points at which you could say you've gathered some lessons about publishing and about that entire process?
Lessons about publishing. Uh, I think the biggest lesson that I learned, and I started publishing before I think the explosion of before it became as easy as it has now to be a self-published or to be an indie published writer. So I think the biggest lesson I had to learn was just to let go of the idea that in order to be a quote unquote real author or a real writer, that I had to be traditionally published. Because, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as indie publishing. It was known as vanity press, and it was very frowned on, and nobody wanted to do that. That was just like for, people who couldn't really write, but they just had to put out this book, or it was for somebody's memoirs or whatever. But when Griffin's Daughter came out, it was just the indie publishing world was just getting started, but it was not nearly like what it is now. But I still had a lot of let's say, prejudices against it, just from growing up in an era where it was very frowned upon. So it took me a lot to be able to get rid of that, to release those preconceived notions. And part of it was the fact that things became a lot easier for people to do this on their own, and to be accepted. But even so, I still went for the traditional route with Griffin's Daughter. I just felt like, yes, I knew that self-publishing was a possibility, but I just didn't want to do that. I just felt like I've got to be traditionally published if I'm going to be considered a legitimate author. And luckily, I was able to get it traditionally published. But then when I had to go out on my own, when my publisher went out of business, and I saw that, hey, even a traditionally published author can suddenly be out there in the wilderness. What do I do? And that's when I decided, okay, I have to just let go of those old preconceived notions, and just seeing all of going to seminars and conferences and seeing all the tools that were becoming available. I took the plunge, and I haven't been sorry. So if there are any of your viewers out there who are authors and they're thinking about, I've got to be traditionally published or I'm not going to be a real author, that's not true at all. You can do it on your own and still be considered legitimate. And there's so much good indie content out there now. I think I read almost nothing but content by indie writers now. It's a renaissance. There's just so much good stuff out there now.
You heard it here first, folks. Leslie Ann Moore says indie writes. Okay. Next up, of all the questions I've asked of you today, is there any of these questions that you would want me to answer?
Anything I want. Well, how do you feel about the publishing industry as a whole these days? And are you writing a book? I'm assuming you're writing books.
Well, yeah, I am. My debut actually came out last September, so it'll be a year old pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
And I am currently writing its sequel. My opinions on publishing as a whole have kind of shifted around a bit. Like indie publishing was becoming a more important deal as I was growing up. So one could argue that I didn't really have to face down that stigma. But still, from a logistical standpoint, I realized that having a more traditionally having the book be traditionally published would be more to my advantage if I wanted to be a published writer and be able to actually live off of it.
Sure.
However, as I was over, I didn't really choose one or the other as I was moving along. I kind of studied the pros and cons as I was writing the first book, though not particularly intensely because I was already involved with another project. And after I did some studying, I thought I would actually start to at least try to get my my foot in the door. And I started with traditional publishing. I thought I would go to directly some publishers. That didn't exactly work. I decided I would go through some agents, and again that didn't exactly work. As in the answers were either rejections or not timely at all. So, and given that my goal was to be a published author by the time I was 30, I decided I can't wait anymore. So I'm just gonna go indie, and that's what I did.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean about having to wait, and it's yeah, and you're clearly a lot younger than I am, and so I started relatively late. When I say later in life, I started relatively later in life in terms of trying to get published, and so I just, after the 2-year process of getting Griffin's daughter off the ground, I thought, with the time that since my horizon is shorter than if I was starting out at I was age 20, then if I want to get my stuff out there, I got to get it out now. And so, I mean, I'm not averse to, if someone wants to come offer me a publishing contract, I'm not averse to that, but I'm not going to wait around, and hope for that to happen. Because as you said, the rejection times they're not timely. You send in something and it could be 6 or 7 months before you get an answer. And I just don't have that kind of time.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so you're happy with how things are going so far, and in your publishing career? Would you consider a traditional contract if it was offered to you?
There would have to be some conditions that would have to fulfill before I could say yes, but if it is offered and if it fulfills my conditions, I think I would accept it.
Yeah, I agree. I would do the same. Yeah, but there definitely would have to be, conditions, as you said. So.
Okay, and we're almost done here, so I'll have to say in advance, thank you for attending. Thank you for accepting this this interview.
Well, thank you for extending the invitation.
Before I close out, is there any link or platform that you want people to know that they can reach out to you through?
They can reach out to me. I'm mostly on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is it's at Leslie _and_more.
I'll put a link in the description.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter. But I also have a website, which is www.leslieandmore.com. So people can reach out that way. So those are the two things. And I'm not on Facebook very much anymore, but I do have a author profile on Facebook, and I have an author page. I have just a regular Facebook page where I post stuff, but not very often anymore. So, but any of those things. Also Instagram. I'm on Instagram as well.
Okay. Now that you've brought it up, I have to ask, because as an indie writer, I have to also work on marketing my book, and as such, I have a whole bunch of social media accounts, but no author profile on Facebook. So, would you
Mm.
recommend that?
Mm, Facebook is there are a lot of users on Facebook, but I would say that I get more engagement through Twitter and Instagram these days. But sure, it doesn't hurt to have your profile everywhere. So why not? Um, you may not get a lot of use out of it. People your age aren't really on Facebook anymore. It's people my age on Facebook mostly.
Yeah.
But there's still, having said that, there's still a lot of good marketing opportunities. I mean, there's thousands of Facebook groups that are sci-fi and fantasy readers. So yeah, I think it's worth it. I just didn't have time to work all that social media, and so I just decided to concentrate on Twitter and Instagram mostly.
Okay, well, thank you for your recommendation, and once again, thank you for your time. And I would also like
Thank
to
you.
thank the audience for having had the patience to to watch through this interview. If you also enjoyed it, then go ahead and leave a like and maybe even share this video wherever you think other people will like it as well. If you have anything you'd like to add to any part of what has been said here, the comment section awaits your input. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well then please subscribe. Ideally also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. My debut, Heir to the Empire Next Generation, is available at most major book retailers under a master link in the description down below, right past mine and Leslie's social media, which you should also check out should you feel so inclined. Until next time, I am Jonathan Taylor, and this has been the Heir's Lair.